we're now at the point where we'd like to look at some of what's happening in New South Wales, and you know, it was impressive to see what's happening on the scale of New York City and in many other mentoring cities as well. But yet there are also some positive things happening in New South Wales, and so it'd be really important to hear how some of that's going, and it may also give us ideas for how we can take what's happening here a bit further. And that's a really important part of today. And I really like the idea too of having sort of the annual conferences and the way we could come together to get that energy, you know, the positive energy that will make us, encourage us and support us to keep going, to trying new stuff and more things. And so now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Norma Shankie Williams from the Department of Planning and Infrastructure, who's going to speak about planning's efforts here to coordinate the interests of a whole range of different sectors. Now, Norma's worked as a town planner for something like over 30 years, both here and in the UK, the state and local governments, in rural and metropolitan areas. She's dealt with all sorts of major legislative and operational reform, as well as the significant challenges associated with long-term strategic metropolitan and regional planning. And those of you who worked in planning and long-range activities like that know what's involved there. Her current role is Director of the Metropolitan and Regional Strategies with the Department of Planning and Infrastructure, and it includes the preparation of a new metropolitan strategy for Sydney and the review of regional strategies that apply to coastal New South Wales. So I'd like to invite Norma up as our next speaker.
Thanks very much, Chris, for that very kind introduction. I'm very, very pleased to be here this morning. This is, for me, a very important issue and something that's very close to my heart. And the link between planning and health is something, as Karen explained this morning with the New York context, is something that has been going on, well, indeed, for centuries. That we are very close partners in the game of making places much more livable and people much more healthy. It indeed was the genesis of modern town planning, that public health was considered, that sanitation was brought to places, that places were made airy and pleasant to live, and people could easily move around their districts. And really, it's something that we can't lose sight of. And occasionally, or more than occasionally, over certain decades, you do find that link between health and planning sometimes gets weaker. But I think we're in a real renaissance of understanding the importance of the links of health and planning at the moment. I noticed that I was given as a sort of framework for the talk, framework for action. So I thought I'd use that to try and focus my presentation this morning. And I see as the framework for action in New South Wales, this framework being delivered through strategic planning at state and local levels, and in partnership with local government and agencies and others to create well-designed places and buildings that are well served by infrastructure and transport. And all this needs to be backed up with some practical guidance, good examples on the ground, and you'll hear some of that later on this morning from other speakers, and good guiding support from state government and indeed local government. At national level, I think we're quite well assisted at the moment by the Major Cities Unit in particular, which sits within the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. They have a document creating places for people and the National Urban Policy, which all enforces and reinforces the importance of well-designed cities with good transport connections so that we can try to improve health as well as the productivity and prosperity of the cities and the people within them. Currently out, well, I think the submissions have actually closed, but recently out on exhibition was the Walking, Riding and Access to Public Transport document, which I'm sure many of you will have read, which was a report that was released in October. Again, encouraging and supporting walking and riding as part of the transport system in Australia's cities and towns. And the Australian Bicycle Council have, of course, got their national cycling strategy, which is trying to double the rate of cycling to 2016 from a base date of 2011. So this national context all helps, I think, to support what we're doing at state level and then at local level. Some elements of the planning context in New South Wales. We have the state plan that the Minister referred to this morning, New South Wales 2021, and there are a series of goals relating to health, which all reinforce what we can do at state level in our strategic planning at state level. The 2013 Metropolitan Strategy is underway. We have been working very hard on this for a number of months now, and we're hoping that when it comes out later this month, we hope, or early next month, that you will see some indications of the importance that we place on health and in our communities. The regional strategies, which serve those areas up and down the coast and into Canberra, are all under review at the moment, from the south coast right up to the far north coast, and they will all be being influenced by the thinking around health and planning. The Premier's Council for Active and Healthy Living, I apologise, Peter, PCAL, is also a very important body that we work very closely with all the time. And of course, the many and various guidelines that are delivered to support us all in state and local planning. The books on your chairs as you came in this morning contain many, many examples of excellent guidelines that we can all use for different aspects of our work. And the critical element that we were talking about this morning, the partnerships across agencies with industry and across local government and state government. A snapshot of the health report, which the Minister did briefly allude to this morning as well, the challenge. Only about half of us in New South Wales get the recommended half an hour of exercise a day, and I try very hard to squeeze that into my busy life. But we know that we can include that incidentally in the going up of stairs and taking the longer way around and all the things that we were talking about before morning tea. Sadly, a lot of us are overweight, and many of us are obese. And the story with the school children that the Minister also spoke about this morning is also a very sorry tale, with a quarter of school children overweight, this having doubled in the last 20 years. The travel patterns are something of an indicator of why this problem of lack of healthy living and increase in obesity is occurring. More than half of children are driven to school now, which is double what it was in 81. And very few walk or cycle, half of what it used to be. More than half of all car trips in Sydney are quite small distances, less than 5 kilometres, and a third are very small distances, less than 3 kilometres. So people are driving when they could be walking, and children are being driven when they could be being more active and walking or cycling to school, as probably many of us did when we were growing up and going to school. But there are emerging trends that are more promising. More people are using public transport to access employment, with nearly a quarter of all Sydney people and as many as 77% of us when we're going in and out of the CBD. This is a really good statistic for the use of public transport. And when we're using public transport, of course, we have that incidental activity, usually at the beginning and the end of those trips. We walk to the bus stop, we walk to the train station. All of that is advantageous to get us moving, get us healthy. The higher fuel and transport costs and the issues about lifestyle choices that a lot of us are making to improve the way we live are in fact part of this story about increasing the amount of walking and cycling that many of us now take on board and adopt for different sorts of trips. So it's the hip pocket as well as the need or the desire to have a healthier, more active life. The strong centres focus that we've had in recent strategic planning and that will continue into the new generation of strategic plans, and building that into, integrating it with planning for transport and infrastructure is also, I think, going to reap really good rewards in the way our cities function and the way we move around them, and therefore the way we live more healthy lives. So that is something that's been talked about and planned for many years. But I think it's now starting to reap those. The benefits are now starting to be reaped, and I think we will see an increased benefit as we move forward. Some of the planning responses then in New South Wales to making that better connection between planning and health, and ensuring that we build places and towns and cities that are healthy places to be and live and work in, is a strong emphasis on strategic planning. And this is something that's underpinning the work that's happening on the planning system review at the moment. The strong mantra is that the new system will be strongly embedded within the strategic plans that we do at state and local level. So we're looking to much better plan for housing close to employment, services and amenities. We make that smart planning choice about how we locate the different land uses within our towns and cities. Good urban design is fundamental in our centres and neighbourhoods to make places that are not only energy efficient but also work well and encourage people to move around safely and with pleasure. Integrated transport networks that include active transport within and between centres are something that we've been working with our friends and colleagues in Transport for New South Wales, as they have been working on the long-term transport master plan and move on to do their mode strategies and their regional transport strategies in coming months and years. And allowing passive and active open space, and more than allowing, planning for passive and active open space close to work and home. So there is an availability of those places for you to go and relax or take exercise at the beginning or the end of the day, take the kids, walk the dog. All of that is important to have close at hand so that people are much more encouraged to and able to live more healthy lives. Very often we have not factored those sorts of elements into new development, less so now. We are much more intelligent about the way we're planning, but this has been a mark of planning in the past. And smaller font additions to that slide doesn't mean that these things are any less important, but from a state planning strategic level, they're not something we would necessarily be actively involved in, such as well-signed connections between houses, jobs, parks, amenities, and that sort of thing. Good design of roads and infrastructure, lighting, a good end-of-trip facilities. Those sorts of things are very important to encourage active lifestyles. And safe environments, overlooked environments without dark or obscured places. And the CEPTED guidelines, crime prevention through environmental design, which have been around for many years now, are still very important guidelines for this sort of planning. And grants programs to assist delivery. It's very important to have the infrastructure, but equally important is to be able to afford it and for the support to be given for provision of that infrastructure. The State Plan, New South Wales 2021, as I mentioned at the beginning and the Minister referred to this morning, has 5 main strategies, essentially about the economy and quality services and infrastructure. But there are a number of goals that I think are particularly resonate for planning and for health. Goal 8, which is about increasing commuter trips made by public transport, has a target of increasing the proportion of total journeys to work by public transport in Sydney metropolitan area by 2016, which is great. And we've got targets for all those other major cities too, which is excellent to have that focus of the mind to improve the public transport availability to our major cities. Goal 8, which is about increased walking and cycling, and the target is to more than double the mode share of bike trips made in Sydney at the local and district level by 2016. These are very important high-level, state-level goals that, as a state government, we will be seeking to deliver through our strategic plans, both in metropolitan Sydney and in the regional areas. Goal 11, which is about keeping people healthy, about reducing overweight and obesity that the Minister alluded to this morning, and to stabilise those rates in adults by 2016 and thereafter reduce. A lot of what is spoken in the state plan about how we do this is through better advice and advocacy, but I think there's a great role for planning, as we all, I'm sure, agree this morning, in how we can keep people healthy, reduce those obesity rates, reduce overweight by building in opportunities for activity, making great places that we can move around easily through active transport, places that are interesting and exciting to walk around and move around in. And livable centres, This is the major goal in the state plan, if you like, for the Department of Planning and Infrastructure, because this is our bread and butter work, if you like. We're about mediating space and making place. This is what planners do. The New South Wales Government is committed to planning for centres that are accessible, viable and great places to live and work. And this is going to be the core of our strategic planning over the coming months and years. Encouraging jobs growth in centres close to where people live, provide access by public transport, get those targets, achieve those targets of public transport use to work and to centres, and thereby increase the percentage of population of people living close to public transport to get to a city or major centre by public transport. Finally, and maybe one that may not immediately rise to mind, is the enhancing of cultural, creative, sporting and recreation opportunities. Again, this is somewhere where the planners can play an important role, not about necessarily the increased participation in sport, rec and arts and cultural activities, but in creating the facilities and making those facilities available for people to, in fact, improve their attendance and their participation in passive and active recreation, cultural and arts events. Creating a great space is as much about creating cultural opportunities for people within that community to participate, get to know each other, engage with one another, and make a great place where people don't feel divorced from their neighbours, they don't feel remote and isolated from society. So health is as much about mental health, a good sense of well-being, as it is about physical health. And having these sorts of facilities and amenities within centres all helps to build that better story, that better future for communities. In terms of delivering the goals, I've mentioned that we'll be doing that through strategic plans like the Metropolitan Strategy and regional strategies. We need to work in partnership with local government to do that, and across a wide group of agencies in state government, as well as our industry partners. I'll touch on that a bit in the next slide. And of course, continue to support PCARL in its advocacy role and its good strategic advice. And events like today, I don't think we would get if it wasn't for not only PCARL, but the Heart Foundation, of course, putting on events like this, which are tremendous to start the conversation, continue the conversation, and keep up the thinking and improve the outcomes. So an example of where planning is particularly partnering with an agency is the partnering with health through the Healthy Built Environments programme, the HBEP at University of New South Wales. The vision of which is that built environments will be planned, designed, developed and managed to promote and protect health for all people. What a fantastic vision. And I know Susan Thompson's here today, who runs that programme in the University of New South Wales, and Peter Sainsbury, who heads up the advisory board as well, chairs that advisory board. They're here today. It's a great work that Built Environments programme has been doing, in particular through research, education, leadership, advocacy, all those elements that are required if we're going to start changing the culture and changing the mindset about the importance of the built environment to deliver good, healthy outcomes. They have a really good literature review, which has been an award-winning piece of work. They had a peer award just last year, and I would recommend, if you haven't already had a look at their literature review, it is a really excellent source of information and inspiration. Planning health and the role of centres is really where I always come back to, because what we need to do, as far as I'm concerned, one of our core activities must be to strengthen the importance in the role of centres. We need to encourage strong growth in centres with good transport connectivity. This is what gets people to be able to move easily from job to work to school to shops to the medical facilities to a cultural event. Between all these services and amenities and home. It has to be well designed so that buildings relate well to each other, there is good public domain and great opportunities for people to use public places, whatever the climate, whatever the weather. So it could be tree shading to provide that pleasant place in the heat of the sun, and we're going to have to experience a lot more of that, of course, in the future. It could be just having a simple water feature using water-sensitive urban design and recycling wastewater. Those sorts of clever ways of designing public places and centres will all reap great rewards for us, our mental and physical health. And we will reap those benefits through urban renewal. And urban renewal programs in New South Wales, particularly in Sydney, are really getting ahead of steam, which is fantastic. We'll have Matthew, I think, later from Urban Growth New South Wales talking about some exciting projects he's been working on. And in the department, urban activation precincts are going to be rolled out across Sydney in partnership with local governments and communities. So it's such an exciting time, because you look around Sydney and you see sometimes such underused, drab, uninteresting, depressing almost places where you really want to just inject it with a bit of vitality, a bit of great design, get things moving, get people feeling proud of the place, and then you'll get investment, you'll get local economies starting to buzz, and it's, hey, win-win for everybody. So planning health and infrastructure, funding of facilities that promote health through active living is something that the department has had a role in, and I'll finish on this point with a few more slides. This isn't the last slide. Funding facilities that promote health is important because you've got to have the money to put things in place. The Sydney Region Development Fund has had a long history of providing that sort of funding mechanism to acquire land for particularly regional open space. So that includes the acquisition of land for the Western Sydney Parklands, that fantastic huge green lung, as it was called when it was launched in Western Sydney, which is serving the people of Western Sydney so well. And the track that runs, connects the Parklands track of the 27-kilometre Parklands track with the M7 cycleway corridor. All that was really money well spent, in my view, for the future of New South Wales, particularly Western Sydney. The Metropolitan Green Space Programme is a programme that's been running for quite a number of years, focusing on the trails framework, where we can link recreational trails across metropolitan Sydney, giving great connectivity for walking and cycling. Since 1990, we've provided funding of at least 32 million in matched funding with local government and other groups. And lots of it goes to the Rec Trails framework, but I think probably we need to think about a refocus of the Metro Green Space Programme and see if we can improve where the money's spent to get the best benefits. And it's still very important. They were very popular, 53 applications for funding just this round. The sort of projects we fund through the Metro Green Space are planning projects like the trails planning and master plans. Capital works programs like walking trails and playgrounds, and bush care, environmental management, and capital works around conservation, parks and open space, and rec facilities. And then finally, the Sharing Sydney Harbour Access Programme, which has also been a very popular programme for those councils that border onto Sydney Harbour and its tributaries. Again, matched funding with local government and community groups for access, and it provides basically money to build facilities to improve access to and enjoyment of the harbour and its tributaries. So we fund capital works for things like walking tracks and cycle paths and public waterfront parks. And it's been going for about 10 years now, in fact, and has committed over 11 million to many projects across Sydney councils. Lots of new improved walking tracks, good public domain, boat access, dinghy storage, all those sorts of things that you may have seen in your local area pop up and you think, gee, that looks great. May have been a SHAP funding programme because we have done such great work across all of the Sydney Harbour and tributaries. So finally, my last slide here about planning and health and the framework for action. I think it involves, certainly from the Department of Planning's point of view, good strategic planning in partnership with local government, as well as agencies and others, to create well-designed, well-connected places to help us all lead more healthy lives. Thanks.